As recorded by ZYX Thala, former intelligence officer of the Veilthic Empire, the meditation chamber aboard our refugee vessel was quiet except for the soft hum of life support systems. I stared at the recording device before me, my three-fingered hands trembling slightly as memories I had tried to bury resurfaced. The Human Coalition had requested these testimonies from survivors of the Veilthic human conflicts. They claimed it was for historical records, but I suspected they wanted to understand how their warriors appeared to those who faced them in battle. My name is ZYX Thala. For 30 cycles, I served as an intelligence officer in the Veilthic Imperial Navy. I witnessed the rise and fall of our empire, and I lived through humanity's emergence as the most terrifying force our galaxy has ever known. This is my account of what I saw, what I experienced, and why I now sleep with the lights on. The first time I heard of humans, they were nothing more than a footnote in our intelligence reports. A primitive species that had barely escaped their home world, establishing a few colonies in nearby systems. Our analysts classified them as minor spacefaring civilization with a threat level of practically zero. We had been expanding our empire for over 1,000 years, absorbing or destroying dozens of species. Humans seemed like they would be just another easy conquest. Our first contact with them occurred when one of our scout fleets encountered a human trading vessel near the Kepler system. The ship was small, cramped, and built with what we considered laughably primitive technology. When our commanders demanded they surrender their cargo and submit to Veilthic authority, the human captain simply replied, "I don't think so." What happened next should have been our warning. The trading vessel, which our sensors indicated had minimal defensive capabilities, somehow managed to disable 2 of our escort fighters before jumping to hyperspace. Our fleet commander was furious but dismissed it as a lucky shot. He ordered the incident classified to avoid embarrassment. That was our first mistake. The second encounter came 6 months later. A Veilthic patrol discovered a human colony ship attempting to establish a settlement in what we considered our territory. The colony ship was massive, clearly designed to carry thousands of civilians, but it appeared to have minimal military escort. Our patrol captain saw an opportunity for easy prisoners and resources. I was aboard the command cruiser as a junior intelligence analyst when we surrounded the human vessel. Our captain broadcast the standard surrender demand, expecting immediate compliance as we had received from every other species we encountered. The humans' response was unlike anything in our experience. "This is Captain Maria Santos of the colony ship New Horizon," came the reply. "We are peaceful settlers seeking only to establish a home for our families. We have no quarrel with you. Please allow us to pass." Our captain laughed. "Peaceful or not, you are now property of the Veilthic Empire. Surrender immediately or face destruction." There was a pause before the human captain spoke again. Her voice had changed, becoming colder, more focused. "I have 3,000 families aboard this ship. Men, women, and children who left everything behind for a chance at a better life. If you want to harm them, you'll have to go through me." What followed was a masterclass in tactical improvisation that our military academies still study today, though they refuse to admit where the tactics originated. The colony ship, which we assumed was defenseless, suddenly deployed dozens of small fighter craft that had been concealed within its hull. But these weren't military fighters. They were mining pods, construction mechs, and even personal shuttles that had been hastily armed by the colonists. Our sensors detected improvised weapons everywhere. Mining lasers had been reconfigured as beam weapons. Construction charges had been turned into missiles. Even their emergency flares had been weaponized. It should have been comical. Our advanced warships against a collection of jury-rigged civilian craft. It wasn't comical. It was terrifying. The humans didn't fight like any military force we had encountered. They didn't follow standard engagement patterns or tactical doctrines. They swarmed our ships like angry insects, attacking from impossible angles, using their knowledge of their own improvised weapons in ways our tactical computers couldn't predict. One mining pod, crewed by what our intelligence later revealed to be a grandfather and his teenage grandson, managed to attach itself to the hull of our heavy cruiser. They used their mining laser to cut through our armor plating like it was paper, then detonated their construction charges inside our engine compartment. A cruiser that had taken our shipyards 5 years to build was crippled by 2 humans in a civilian mining vehicle. But it was their willingness to sacrifice that truly shook us. When our fighters finally adapted to their unconventional tactics and began destroying their improvised craft, the humans didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They kept fighting, even when it was clear they couldn't win. I watched through our sensors as a human shuttle, its hull breached and, atmosphere venting, made a suicide run at our command ship. The pilot could have ejected. She had time to escape. Instead, she aimed her crippled craft at our bridge and accelerated. Our point defense systems destroyed her shuttle just meters from impact, but the explosion still damaged our communications array. The final transmission we intercepted from that shuttle haunts me still, for the children. For the future. Humanity remembers. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it was over, we had lost 2 escorts and suffered significant damage to our remaining ships. The human colony ship was destroyed, but not before they had evacuated most of their civilians to the planet's surface in escape pods. Our victory felt hollow. Captain Santos had been captured when her bridge was finally overwhelmed. When she was brought before our fleet commander, she was injured and exhausted, but her eyes still burned with defiance. Our captain demanded to know how civilians had fought so effectively against trained military forces. Her answer changed everything we thought we knew about humans. "You don't understand," she said, wincing as medics treated her wounds. "We weren't just defending a ship. We were defending hope. Every person on that colony ship gave up everything they had for a chance at something better. You threatened to take that away from them. Did you really think we would just hand it over?" Our captain scoffed. "Your resistance was impressive but futile. Your ship is destroyed. Your colony will submit to Veilthic rule." Captain Santos smiled, and something about that expression made my skin crawl. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't over. It's just beginning. Every human who dies fighting you becomes a story. Every story becomes inspiration. Every inspiration becomes 10 more fighters who won't give up. You didn't just attack a colony ship. You attacked the idea that humans can build something better. And ideas are much harder to kill than ships." At the time, I thought she was simply trying to save face in defeat. I didn't understand that she was making a promise. News of the colony ship's destruction spread through human space faster than our intelligence networks could track. The official human government condemned the attack and demanded negotiations. But something else was happening in the shadows. Groups of human civilians were organizing, sharing information, pooling resources. They called themselves the New Horizon Memorial Fleet, named after the destroyed colony ship. Our intelligence services initially dismissed these groups as ineffective civilian protesters. We were wrong. The first indication that something had changed came 3 months after the colony ship incident. A Veilthic supply convoy disappeared near the edge of human space. When we found the wreckage, it was clear the ships had been attacked by multiple small craft using hit-and-run tactics. The attackers had taken medical supplies, food, and construction equipment, but left valuable metals and weapons untouched. Our analysts were puzzled. Pirates would have taken the weapons. Military forces would have destroyed everything. But these attackers seemed only interested in supplies that could support civilian populations. The attacks continued and escalated. Human civilian groups, operating with nothing but personal ships and improvised weapons, began systematically disrupting our supply lines. They didn't try to hold territory or engage our main fleet. Instead, they struck fast and disappeared, always targeting non-military supplies that could help displaced populations. Our military leadership was furious but also confused. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't want to conquer your territory, steal your resources, or even necessarily kill your soldiers? The humans seemed content to simply make it impossible for us to maintain our expansion into their space. Then came the rescue operations. The first one happened when a Veilthic research station suffered a catastrophic system failure. The station was studying a dangerous stellar phenomenon, and when their containment systems failed, they had less than 6 hours before radiation levels would become lethal. The nearest Veilthic rescue ships were 2 days away. A human civilian rescue vessel arrived first. The ship was old, patched, and clearly not military. Its captain identified himself as Dr. James Chen, formerly of the New Horizon colony ship. He had been one of the civilians who escaped to the planet during the battle. Now he commanded a ship full of other survivors, and they had come to help their former enemies. Our research station commander was suspicious but desperate. The humans worked for 4 hours straight, evacuating Veilthic personnel under dangerous conditions. They could have demanded concessions, taken hostages, or simply left us to die. Instead, they focused entirely on saving lives. When the evacuation was complete, Dr. Chen transmitted a message to our fleet: "We know you're coming to arrest us. We'll be gone before you arrive. But we wanted you to know something. We don't hate you because you're Veilthic. We fight you because you won't let people live in peace. Any people. That includes your own." The rescue ship vanished into hyperspace minutes before our patrol arrived. Similar incidents began occurring throughout our border regions. Every time Veilthic civilians faced disaster, human rescue ships seemed to appear from nowhere. They saved lives, refused rewards, and disappeared before our military could respond. The rescued Veilthic personnel always reported the same thing: the humans treated them with professional courtesy and genuine concern for their welfare. This was psychological warfare more effective than any weapon. Our soldiers began to question what they were fighting for. If humans were the savage primitives our propaganda claimed, why were they risking their lives to save Veilthic civilians? If this was a war for resources and territory, why did human raiders only take supplies needed for survival, leaving valuable materials behind? The breaking point came when Admiral Krixtal, our most decorated military commander, encountered a human rescue operation personally. The Admiral was leading a patrol near a binary star system when they received a distress call from a Veilthic merchant vessel. Solar flares had damaged the ship's navigation systems, and it was drifting toward the gravitational pull of the larger star. The crew of 43 civilians would be dead within hours. Admiral Krixtal's ships moved to respond, but they were too far away. A human vessel was closer. I was aboard the Admiral's flagship as his intelligence liaison when we watched the rescue unfold. The human ship positioned itself between the merchant vessel and the star, using its own hull to shield the Veilthic ship from radiation while their crews worked to repair the navigation systems. It was incredibly dangerous. One miscalculation would have sent both ships into the star. For 3 hours, we watched humans risk their lives to save Veilthic civilians. When the merchant ship's systems were restored, the human captain transmitted a simple message: "Safe travels. Look after each other." Admiral Krixtal ordered his ships to pursue the human vessel, but his heart wasn't in it. That night, he called me to his private quarters for a conversation that changed the course of the war. "Intelligence Officer ZYX Thala," he said, staring out at the stars through his viewport. "In your analysis, what are we fighting for?" I gave him the standard answer about Veilthic supremacy and imperial destiny, but he waved it away. "No," he said. "What are we really fighting for? These humans don't want our territory. They don't want to enslave our people. They just want to be left alone to build their colonies and live their lives. We attacked them because they were weak, and now they're fighting back. But they're not fighting like conquerors. They're fighting like parents protecting their children," I finished. He nodded slowly. "Every time we attack their civilians, we create more fighters. Every time they save our civilians, they make our soldiers question why we're fighting them. This isn't a war we can win through force." "What are you suggesting, Admiral?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "I'm suggesting that maybe Captain Santos was right. Maybe we didn't just attack a ship. Maybe we attacked something bigger than that." The Admiral was relieved of command 2 weeks later for defeatist thinking. But his words had already spread through the fleet. Soldiers who had enthusiastically supported the war began questioning their orders. Officers started reporting equipment malfunctions when ordered to attack human civilian targets. The human resistance continued to grow, but it grew in ways our military doctrine couldn't counter. They didn't build armies, they built networks of ordinary people who refused to give up. They didn't conquer territory, they simply made it impossible for us to hold territory without the constant fear of rescue operations, supply disruptions, and the knowledge that every civilian we threatened might inspire 10 more humans to join the resistance. The war began to turn not because humans built better weapons or won decisive battles, but because they convinced our own people that the war was wrong. But this was only the beginning. The real horror of fighting humans wasn't their tactical innovation or their willingness to sacrifice. It was their ability to transform their enemies into allies, their defeats into victories, and their losses into inspiration for others. As I prepared to record the second part of my testimony, I reflected on a conversation I had with a human prisoner early in the conflict.
She had asked me a simple question that I couldn't answer then, but understand now. What happens to an empire that can only grow by making enemies? What happens when it meets people who can turn enemies into friends? The answer, as I would learn, was the end of everything we thought we knew about war. Continued testimony of ZYX Thala, former intelligence officer of the Velthic Empire. The recording device hummed softly as I continued my testimony. The memories of the next phase of the conflict were even more disturbing than the first encounters. It was during this period that we began to understand the true scope of what we faced. Humans didn't just fight battles, they fought ideas. They didn't just defeat armies, they transformed the very nature of warfare itself. The transition from isolated incidents to full-scale resistance happened faster than our intelligence services could track. What had begun as scattered civilian groups had evolved into something our military analysts struggled to classify. It wasn't an army in any traditional sense, yet it was more effective than most military forces we had encountered. The turning point came with what humans later called the Minerva Station incident. Minerva Station was a Velthic research facility built into an asteroid in a strategically important system. It served as both a scientific outpost and a military intelligence gathering point, monitoring human communications and fleet movements. The station housed over 200 Velthic personnel and was considered impregnable due to its location deep within the asteroid's natural defenses. Our first indication that something was wrong came when the station's regular communication suddenly ceased. Admiral Vexthar dispatched a full battle group to investigate, expecting to find evidence of equipment failure or perhaps a small-scale human raid. What they found instead was impossible. Minerva Station was intact but completely abandoned. Every Velthic person on the station had vanished without a trace. There were no signs of battle, no evidence of forced entry, no indication of violence whatsoever. The station's systems were still operational, its defenses were still active, and its valuable research data was completely untouched. The only clue to what had happened was a message left in the station's central computer, written in perfect Velthic script, to the Velthic Imperial Fleet: your personnel are safe and unharmed. They are being cared for by human medical staff and will be returned to you at the conclusion of hostilities. No one was hurt during this operation. We hope that someday you will understand that this war doesn't have to continue. Signed, the Free Human Coalition. Our military leadership was baffled and furious. How had humans infiltrated the most secure facility in the sector without triggering a single alarm? How had they evacuated over 200 people without anyone noticing? How had they accomplished what should have been impossible with our technology? The investigation that followed revealed the terrifying truth about human adaptability. For months, humans had been studying our technology, our security procedures, and our personnel patterns. But they hadn't approached the problem like traditional military forces. Instead of trying to overwhelm our defenses or find weaknesses in our systems, they had focused on understanding our psychology. The infiltration team had consisted of only 12 humans, led by a former xenobiologist named Dr. Sarah Kim. They had approached Minerva Station in what appeared to be a damaged cargo vessel requesting emergency assistance. This was a routine occurrence in deep space, and our protocols required that we provide aid to vessels in distress. Once aboard the station, the humans had not immediately revealed their true purpose. Instead, they had spent several days working alongside our personnel, helping with routine maintenance and appearing genuinely grateful for our assistance. During this time, they had carefully studied our daily routines, identified key personnel, and mapped the station's layout. Dr. Kim later described their strategy in a transmission to our fleet: we didn't come to fight you. We came to understand you. We learned your schedules, your concerns, your relationships with your colleagues. We discovered that despite your empire's aggressive policies, most of you are good people just trying to do your jobs and get home to your families. That's when we knew we could help you. The actual capture of the station had been accomplished through a combination of psychology and technology that our military had never encountered. Instead of using violence, the humans had simply convinced our personnel to leave. They had fabricated a believable emergency scenario involving a dangerous radiation leak that required immediate evacuation. Our personnel, trusting the humans who had been helping them for days, had cooperated fully with the evacuation procedures. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the entire station had been peacefully emptied. But the most shocking part wasn't how they had taken the station. It was what they did afterward. Every Velthic person who had been on Minerva Station was indeed being held in comfortable facilities on human worlds. They were receiving excellent medical care, good food, and regular communication with their families.
Many reported that their human captors had gone out of their way to accommodate their dietary needs, cultural practices, and personal preferences. More disturbing were the reports of conversations between the Veilthic personnel and their human guards. The humans had made no attempt to extract military information or force political conversions. Instead, they had engaged in simple, friendly discussions about families, hobbies, and hopes for the future.
Commander Talvek, the former station chief, later reported, "They treated us like guests rather than prisoners."
They were genuinely interested in our lives, our culture, our perspectives on the war. They shared stories about their own families and showed us pictures of their children. It was impossible to see them as the savage barbarians our propaganda had portrayed them as. The psychological impact on our military was devastating.
How do you maintain hatred for an enemy who treats your captured personnel better than your own military sometimes did? How do you convince soldiers to fight people who go out of their way to preserve life and dignity even in warfare? But humans were just getting started. The next phase of their resistance involved what our military analysts eventually termed empathy warfare. Instead of attacking our military assets directly, humans began targeting our understanding of what the war was really about. They started broadcasting on all frequencies, not with propaganda or threats, but with simple personal messages. Human families would share stories about their daily lives, their hopes and dreams, their struggles and triumphs. They talked about their children learning to walk, their grandparents teaching them family recipes, their communities coming together to help neighbors in need. These weren't political messages or military communications. They were just ordinary people sharing ordinary moments of humanity.
But they were being broadcast directly to our fleet personnel, many of whom were far from home and missing their own families. Our communications officers tried to block these transmissions, but humans had become remarkably skilled at bypassing our filters.
Worse, many of our personnel didn't want the transmissions blocked.
Listening to human families talk about their lives became a popular pastime among our crews, especially those on long patrol assignments.
The messages weren't one way either.
Humans actively encouraged Veilthic personnel to respond, to share their own stories and experiences. What began as propaganda broadcasts evolved into genuine cross-cultural communication between individuals on both sides of the conflict.
I remember one transmission that particularly affected our crew.
A human child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, had recorded a message asking why the big space people were angry at her family. She wanted to know if Veilthic children liked the same games she did, and if they would want to be friends if they met. The message was so innocent, so genuinely curious, that our communications officer forgot to cut the feed. The response from our crew was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of our personnel wanted to record replies, to answer her questions, to assure her that they weren't angry at her or her family. Our captain had to issue direct orders prohibiting any response, but the damage was done.
How do you convince soldiers to fight a war against children who just want to be friends?
The brilliance of human psychological warfare became clear when our intelligence services realized what was happening. Every personal interaction, every friendly conversation, every act of kindness was slowly dismantling the ideological foundations that supported our war effort.
Humans understood something about conflict that our military leadership had never grasped. Wars aren't fought between armies or governments. They're fought between people.
And, once people begin to see their enemies as fellow individuals with families, hopes, and dreams, it becomes almost impossible to maintain the hatred necessary for sustained warfare. The crisis deepened when human rescue operations began specifically targeting Veilthic personnel in danger. They didn't limit their rescue efforts to their own people or even to civilians. Human ships would risk everything to save Veilthic military personnel from disasters, accidents, or dangerous situations.
The most famous incident involved the Veilthic destroyer Korthala, which suffered a catastrophic engine failure during a patrol mission.
The ship was stranded in space with 47 crew members and failing life support systems. The nearest Veilthic rescue ship was 18 hours away, but the crew only had 6 hours of air remaining. A human civilian transport vessel, the Mercy's Gift, responded to the distress call despite being deep in what was technically a war zone. The ship's captain, Elena Vasquez, had lost her son in one of the early skirmishes with Veilthic forces. Our fleet command tried to warn Captain Vasquez away, informing her that the Korthala was a military vessel and that any approach would be considered a hostile act. Her response was broadcast on all frequencies: "I don't care what kind of ship it is. There are 47 people about to die,
and I can save them. My son wouldn't want me to let anyone's children die if I could prevent it. The rescue operation took 4 hours.
Captain Vasquez and her crew worked in shifts to transfer the Velthic personnel to their ship, providing medical care and emotional support throughout the process. When Velthic rescue ships finally arrived, they found their personnel safe, well cared for, and profoundly affected by their experience. Lieutenant Kexmora of the Korthala later wrote in his official report, "The human captain who saved us had every reason to hate our people. Yet she risked her life and her ship to preserve ours." When I asked her why, she simply said, "Because it was the right thing to do." I have thought about those words every day since, and I can no longer understand why we are fighting these people. Such incidents became increasingly common as the war continued. Human civilian vessels seemed to appear wherever Velthic personnel were in danger, offering assistance regardless of the risk to themselves. They asked for nothing in return except the opportunity to help. Our military leadership tried various strategies to counter these psychological attacks. They issued orders prohibiting interaction with humans, restricted communication channels, and increased propaganda efforts emphasizing Velthic superiority and human treachery. None of it worked. The problem wasn't that our personnel didn't believe in Velthic superiority. The problem was that humans weren't acting like inferior beings. They were demonstrating capabilities, values, and levels of compassion that challenged everything our empire stood for. When faced with an enemy that treats your prisoners better than your own government treats its citizens, how do you maintain the moral authority to continue fighting? When confronted with people who risk their lives to save yours, how do you justify orders to attack their families? The psychological warfare reached its peak during what became known as the Children's Crusade. A group of human children, most between the ages of 8 and 15, had organized a peaceful demonstration near one of our border outposts. They weren't protesting or making demands. Instead, they were simply offering gifts, drawings they had made, songs they had composed, and letters they had written expressing their desire for peace. Our border commander, General Thexval, was faced with an impossible situation. Military protocol required him to disperse any unauthorized gatherings in the border zone. But, how do you disperse a group of children offering friendship? The general chose to ignore the gathering, hoping it would disperse on its own. Instead, it grew larger. More children arrived each day, bringing more gifts, more songs, and more expressions of hope for peace. They set up a small camp just outside the range of our defensive systems and settled in for what appeared to be a permanent vigil. The situation became even more complicated when Velthic personnel began responding to the children's overtures. Our soldiers started leaving their own gifts at the border of the camp, food rations, blankets, and small tokens from their homeworlds. Communications officers began playing the children's songs over the outpost's internal speakers. Within 2 weeks, the Children's Crusade had transformed a military border outpost into something resembling a cultural exchange program. Velthic and human children were communicating through drawings, music, and simple games that transcended language barriers. General Thexval's final report on the incident was classified at the highest levels, but I saw it as part of my intelligence duties. He wrote, "I have been a soldier for 30 years. I have fought in dozens of campaigns and commanded thousands of troops. But I have never faced an enemy like these children. How do you defeat people who respond to your weapons with flowers? How do you conquer hearts that are open to friendship? I request immediate reassignment to non-combat duties. I can no longer in good conscience participate in a war against such people." The Children's Crusade was eventually dispersed when human authorities, concerned for the children's safety, convinced them to return home. But the psychological damage to our war effort was irreversible. Hundreds of Velthic personnel had witnessed the event directly, and news of it spread throughout the fleet faster than our security services could contain it. By this time, desertion rates in our military had reached critical levels. Not because our personnel were cowards or traitors, but because they could no longer understand what they were fighting for. The humans had successfully redefined the conflict from a war between civilizations to a tragic misunderstanding between people who should have been friends. Our intelligence services finally realized what humans had been doing all along. They weren't trying to win the war through superior tactics or technology. They were trying to end it by making it impossible for anyone to continue fighting with a clear conscience. It was, as one of our analysts noted, the most sophisticated psychological operation ever conceived. Humans had weaponized empathy, turning our own capacity for compassion against the institutional hatred that sustained our war machine. But even this was just preparation for what came next. The humans were about to demonstrate that their greatest strength wasn't their ability to fight, but their ability to transform their enemies into allies through the simple act of treating them as fellow beings worthy of respect and kindness. The final phase of the conflict would prove that there are some victories that can only be achieved through defeat, and some strengths that can only be demonstrated through apparent weakness. Humans were about to teach our empire the most terrifying lesson of all, that true power lies not in the ability to destroy your enemies, but in the ability to make them realize they were never your enemies in the first place. Final testimony of HFY Stories, former intelligence officer of the Velthic Empire. As I began recording the final portion of my testimony, my hands were steadier than they had been when I started. Perhaps facing these memories had diminished their power over me, or perhaps I had finally found a way to process experiences that defied everything I thought I knew about warfare and civilization. The end of the Velthic human conflict didn't come through a decisive battle or negotiated surrender. Instead, it came through what historians would later call the impossible victory, a triumph achieved not through defeating the enemy, but through transforming the very nature of what it meant to be enemies at all. The final phase began with the most audacious human operation of the entire war, the rescue of our emperor. Emperor Vaxthal had been leading what was supposed to be our final campaign against human space. Our largest battle fleet, consisting of over 300 warships, had surrounded the human core worlds. The plan was simple: demand unconditional surrender or face the complete destruction of human civilization. We had expected desperate resistance, perhaps even the use of some secret weapon that humans had been developing. What we didn't expect was for them to save our emperor's life. The attack came not from human forces, but from within our own fleet. A group of Velthic military officers, led by Admiral Krixtal, who had been quietly building support for peace despite his official disgrace, had decided that the war had gone too far. They attempted to arrest the emperor and negotiate a ceasefire with human forces. The coup attempt failed, but, in the chaos of battle between loyal and rebel Velthic forces, the emperor's flagship suffered critical damage. His ship was crippled, life support was failing, and the nearest loyal vessel was too far away to assist before the ship's systems collapsed completely. A human medical frigate was the closest vessel capable of mounting a rescue operation. Dr. Sarah Kim, the same woman who had orchestrated the Minerva Station operation, was aboard the medical ship. When her sensors detected the Emperor's distress signal, she faced an impossible decision. The Emperor was personally responsible for ordering attacks that had killed thousands of human civilians. He had authorized the destruction of colonies and the enslavement of captured populations. By every measure of justice, he deserved to face the consequences of his actions. Instead, Dr. Kim ordered her ship to mount an immediate rescue operation. I was aboard one of the loyal Velthic vessels frantically trying to reach the Emperor's ship when we received Dr. Kim's transmission. Her words are burned into my memory. This is Dr. Sarah Kim of the human medical vessel New Hope. We are moving to assist the damaged Velthic flagship. All weapons systems on our ship are powered down. We are here only to preserve life. Please do not interfere with our medical operations. Our fleet commanders were stunned. The humans had their greatest enemy helpless before them, and they were mounting a rescue operation instead of finishing him off. It made no tactical sense, violated every principle of warfare we understood, and completely undermined the Emperor's propaganda about human brutality. The rescue operation was broadcast live across all frequencies, allowing both fleets to watch as human medical personnel worked to save Velthic lives. Dr. Kim personally supervised the Emperor's medical treatment, ensuring he received the same level of care as any other patient. When Emperor Vaxthal regained consciousness in the human medical bay, his first words were reportedly, "Why?" Dr. Kim's response became one of the most quoted statements in galactic history: "Because you're alive, and we're doctors." It's really that simple. The psychological impact of this operation on both fleets was immediate and overwhelming. Velthic personnel who had spent years fighting humans suddenly watched their enemies risk everything to save their leader's life. Human personnel who had lost friends and family to Velthic aggression saw their leaders choose compassion over revenge. But the real transformation began when the Emperor spent 3 days recovering aboard the human medical ship. During his stay, Emperor Vaxthal was not treated as a prisoner or held in isolation. Instead, he was placed in a regular recovery ward alongside human patients who were being treated for wounds suffered in the war. For perhaps the first time in his life, the Emperor was surrounded by ordinary people dealing with extraordinary circumstances. The human patients knew who he was. They knew he was responsible for their suffering and the deaths of their loved ones. Yet they treated him with the same courtesy and kindness they showed to everyone else in the medical facility. They shared their food when he complained about the taste of the standard medical rations. They helped him understand the entertainment systems when he couldn't figure out how to operate the human technology. They even included him in their conversations about their families, their hopes for the future, and their dreams of peace. One incident, reported by multiple witnesses, particularly affected the emperor. A human child, maybe 10 years old, was being treated for injuries suffered during a Veilthic bombing raid. The child had lost her parents in the attack and was alone except for the medical staff caring for her. When she learned that the large alien in the bed next to hers was the emperor of the people who had attacked her world, her response shocked everyone present. Instead of fear or anger, she showed concern. The emperor had been having trouble sleeping due to nightmares about the war, and the child offered to share her stuffed animal to help him rest better. "My mommy always said that when people do bad things, it's because they're scared or hurt," the child told him. "Are you scared? Is that why your people fight so much?" Emperor Vaxthal later described this moment as the point when he finally understood what humans